Jumpin In on Manx Radio.
With Howard and Chris Kane.
Hello.
Good evening.
And welcome. And welcome once again to Manx Radio's Jumpin' In programme, the best in modern and contemporary jazz here on your favourite station on the Isle of Man. Of course, it is Jumpin' In with myself, H.
And me, Chris. Yes, welcome along to this week's show in what might pass for the summer weather here on the Isle of Man. And dare I say it, it may well be the best weather we'll see, but let's make the most of it. There's not much point in going out on a Friday night, is there? Because virtually everywhere's dug up. So throw another log in the fire pit, smoke-free, naturally, and you're probably doing your bit by clearing the tons of fallen trees still by the wayside since February storms. Wind up the gramophone, uncork something nice, and sit back for an hour or so of the best music. So, H, what's been firing your imagination this week, and what has been having you dance around the garden other than the regular trips to the bottle bank?
Oh, I've really been enjoying going forwards and going back, as they say. Flashpoints and undercurrents. John Surman, not a new one. He's not touring anymore. He is still doing a bit of recording, but he's sort of almost semi-retired. But this is going back to 1960s when he was still something of a firebrand, and a wonderful record from Cuneiform with the big band over there he played with. Pablo Held, we really enjoyed him at the London Jazz Festival last year. Great album of standards, a little bit from him, and some ballads. Yes, ballads from Nor Preminger.
And for me, well, it's a trip through time, as my lot have been taking the slow boat to the market. We're solid for the first time in a quarter of a century. We're back on the road twice after 6 years, and we fly away after just 5 years. But to start, we have Dream Band Volume 7, The Lost Tapes 1959, finally seeing the day after just 66 years. Here's Terry Gibbs at the Vans with his Dream Band and the Eddie Sampson standard, Don't Be That Way. Fantastic. Don't Be That Way. Originally written by Eddie Sampson, a trumpeter and composer, when he was with the Chick Webb Orchestra back in 1933. Released by Chick in 1934, and it did chart. But then a couple of years later, he joined the Benny Goodman Band, and they had another version of it. And I know Eddie Sampson was famously asked which version did he like better. And he said, musically, I think I like the Chick Webb. Financially, the Benny Goodman. Obviously, it sold more than the original version, but that version from vibraphonist and band leader Terry Gibbs and his dream band recorded live. Obviously, Terry is still going strong, aged 100, and has some 66-odd albums to his name already. But last year, his son started setting about digitising every recording of his, and Terry found a tape labelled 1959 Jazz Party. He immediately recognised it as the Dream Band and worked out the sessions came from 2 sets at well-known Hollywood night spots, the Seville Club and the Sundown Club. And now, some 66 years later, the sessions have been released as the Terry Gibbs Dream Band, The Lost Tapes, Volume 7, 1959, and very good it sounds too. And the band, well, on trumpets, Al Porcino, Ray Toscano, Stu Williamson, Conti Candoli, there's a name to conjure with, John Anduni, Lee Katz on trombones, Vern Riley, Bob Elginven, Cole Fontana, Joe Caderney, Bill Smiley, Bob Burgess, Joe Manny and Kenny Kennedy, Med Flory, Bill Holman, Bill Perkins and Jan Swartz, all on saxophones. Lou Levy, Pete Jolly and Benny Aronov on pianos. On bass, Max Bennett and Buddy Clark, and the great Mel Lewis on drums. And of course, Terry Gibbs on the vibes. 100, not out.
Conti Condoli, big name on the West Coast scene. I did see Gibbs years ago, Terry Gibbs, when he must have been a whippersnapper in his 70s, I think, when I went on my one and only cruise in my life, which was a jazz cruise, and wonderful it was too, on the SS Norway around the Caribbean for a week, and with various jazz artists on board, one of whom was Terry Gibbs, not with that big band, but with a quintet I think he was with at the time.
It's the quality sounds remarkable, because that was just his own recording of the band. It sounds really, really good for 1959.
Terrific stuff. We're staying with standards, but going from big to small. We are going to trio, in fact, one of my favourite formats in the small jazz canon. Pablo Held Trio. We enjoyed them very much and did a great interview with him back at the London Jazz Festival 2024. And very chatty, he's very busy himself and also does his own podcast and talks to various musical stars or heroes of his own. And one of the albums he had there we were talking about was this, just the Pablo Held Trio plays standards, his interpretations of some classics, some jazz classics. We're going Bill Evans-wise, and this is Pablo's take on Bill's Very Early. Lovely stuff. Very early, the Bill Evans track as interpreted there by Pablo Held and his long-time trio, with Pablo himself says on our previous 14 recordings. That's how long they've been together, which is unusual really these days for people to stay together so long. And when we were talking to him at the London Jazz last year, he reflected on that and said, I don't think we could do some of the music when, if you play together in a small format like that with the same players for so long, you definitely develop a sort of telepathic empathy. You almost know what someone's going to do, which direction they're going to go before they've done it. And he's been playing with Robert Lanferman on bass and Jonas Bergwinkel on drums for all this time. And he goes on to say, yes, we've explored a whole range of musical realms, my original compositions, a lot of those, classical pieces, works by my father, Peter Held, and the occasional tunes by some of our favourite artists. But delving deeply into each of these musical environments has played a real pivotal role in shaping the trio's sound over the years. We're fulfilling a dream with this album of recording an entire album of standards. And he sort of says how he's influenced, and with regard to that particular track, clearly it's Bill Evans, but he says working on each of the songs in these albums made me reflect on the different musical heroes of mine over the years. Therefore, it's worth pointing out them on each specific track here. So when it comes to very early, of course, he lists Bill Evans, John Coltrane, and Norma Winston.
Well, he's had Norma on a couple of albums, of course, and not least his wonderful Jazz at the Loft sessions, which were released during lockdown.
Yeah.
3.5 hours, all with different lineups on every track. And we talked to him about that, and I asked him, and he said, "Oh yeah, I've got full albums worth sessions with each of those different groups. They're all sitting in the can, waiting to come out." But wonderful, very, very nice player and a lovely bloke. And next up for me, a band made up of 3 of the very best players on the scene who decided they could get together again. And I'm glad they did. MTB. Does that ring a bell?
No.
MTB are Mehldau, Turner and Bernstein. Pianist Brad Mehldau, saxophonist Mark Turner and guitarist Peter Bernstein, who got together back in 1994 with bassist Larry Granadier and drummer Leon Jackson and recorded an album called Consenting Adults, which is very fine. But it did leave many people questioning, was there going to be a tour or would there be a follow-up album? Well, a mere 25 years later, here it is, with the only change being that Bill Stewart takes over the drum chair. Here's the title track, Solid Jackson. Solid Jackson from MTB being Mehldau, Turner and Bernstein, an original composition from their recent release of the same name, Solid Jackson. The set was recorded over 2 days back in 2023 with no prior rehearsals or gigs, and it came out at the end of last year. Let's hope they take it on tour. This is such a great album, I really think that they hope about doing it again, but maybe not so long this time before the next one.
Hi there, this is John Surman and you're listening to Jumpin In on Manx Radio.
cracking stuff, it has to be said, from way back when. Hamburg, April the 18th, so almost the exact date of this show, in fact, plus or minus a few days, 1969. John Surman, Flashpoints and Undercurrents, when, he was a young Turk, as it were, and still playing with that fiery, inventive brilliance he had and a bit of anger as a sort of a younger man. His later work, much softer, of course, and that's life, isn't it? You tend to mellow with age, I think. But there he was as a young Turk back in 1969. Great release on cuneiform just recently. A bit thin on liner notes, so I refer to the redoubtable Stuart Nicholson writing in Jazzwise on his review of it, which he gives it 5 stars. Quite rightly too as well. And I quote Stuart, and he says, some important discographical information first that's not mentioned in either the album lines or in the publicity notes. He's quite right. In 1969, Norddeutscher Rundfunk, or NDR, the public broadcaster based in Hamburg, invited Surman to participate in the NDR Jazz Workshop series for both TV and radio with a 10-piece ensemble. The group assembled on the 14th of April, rehearsed on the 15th and 16th. On the 17th, they recorded 5 selections for transmission, which first appeared as Flashpoint NDR Jazz Workshop, April 1969, on both CD and DVD in 2011, which they did, and cracking stuff it is too. When I saw this, I thought it was the same stuff being re-released, but no. On Friday the 18th of April, the full concert was broadcast in front of a live audience and appears on this new 2-CD set, Flashpoints and Undercurrents, comprising 13 originals. And Stuart says it fully justifies the 5-star rating. In fact, I'll give it another star if there was one lying around. On the 13 tracks, 13 written by Surman, and of the 13 tracks, 10 have not been recorded elsewhere. The lineup, well, it's a who's who. John Surman, Kenny Wheeler, Malcolm Griffiths, Eric Klanschuster, Mike Osborne, Ronnie Scott, yes, that Ronnie Scott, Alan Skidmore, Fritz Power, Harry Miller on bass, the great Alan Jackson at the drums, and still sounding, as we say, fresh as paint. Lovely stuff.
Great thing about these is you remember back then, of course, we were buying LPs and they were pretty much limited to 30, 35 to 40 minutes max. So we're getting these concerts coming out in remarkable quality, like that other one from 1959 that I played at the beginning, Terry Gibbs, and being digitised. And we're just getting access to so much wonderful music. Great exploring to be done out there. So go and find...
I should have said it. Jackknife was the track in case anyone's shouting at me. Jackknife.
Yeah, find whatever polishes your fancy for you. Next up for me, a new release from saxophonist who I only discovered with his last album, the 2009 release of A Day of Reckoning, where for me he was channeling his inner Michael Brecker. This is the saxophonist Dan Zinn, and that band had the great Taylor Egsty on piano along with bassist Zach Ostroff and drummer Mark Ferber. Often the way when you discover new albums like that, you think, well, I must have noticed them otherwise, it must be their first release, but not so, as Two Roads is Zinn's 6th release now, and from it, here's Yarak. Yeah, you can't say more than that, can you? Fantastic. Yarak, which is actually part of what a hawk wears when you train a hawk. It also means, various different things in Turkish. Nonetheless, Dan's in Two Roads, his new release. The title is significant, he said, because whilst jogging, after the sessions had been recorded but they didn't have a name, he had a serious fall which caused significant injuries to his right hand and put in question whether he would ever be able to play again. He can, with adjustments, and is thankfully getting there. But the album had been already recorded, as I say, without a title. He listened back to tapes during his convalescence, and he said it helped him gain focus and the fortitude to start again with adjustments and relearn his instrument. Zin is of Norwegian heritage. Didn't know where he's from. He's obviously lived in the States for some while, and he cites Jan Garbarek as a great influence, which you can hear if you listen to the rest of the album. And what a great band. Totally new, as seems to be the way with each of his releases. Rachel Z on piano and keyboards, Jeff Denson on bass, Omar Hakim on the drums, and Brian Race on the pandeiro. Have you got one of those?
Not as such.
No, a pandeiro is a Brazilian hand drum, which looks to me pretty much like a giant tambourine. And Zin, of course, on saxes and flutes. The album Two Roads was inspired by the Robert Frost poem, A Road Not Taken. And I think we should be thankful he's chosen the more difficult path of relearning again and not giving in, as I'm sure he's got plenty more great music to give.
You're listening to Jumpin' In with Chris and myself, H, here on Manx Radio. Saxophonist Noel Preminger, we've featured him before, and I'm very fond of him. I must admit, he has quite a name for himself, maybe not up there or as well known as he ought to be, and I don't know how much he's been touring. He is touring at the moment, but I don't think he's actually playing in Britain. He's touring around Europe, I'm fairly certain, but I don't think that includes a London or Manchester type gig. But yeah, a fine player he, and plays with some of the best people around, and his album, which he brought out in February of this year, Ballads, is exactly that, and it's, as the notes says, luxuriating in beauty for beauty's sake. Here he is, pianist Julian Shaw, bassist Kim Cass, drummer Alan Mednard, and a track called New. He's got a great tone and really lovely, as we heard there, I think, luxuriating in beauty for beauty's sake, and also top marks as well, as he quotes in some of the liner notes, or at least in some of the presser. He says, the quality of sound for a record like this is hugely important to me. And the guys at Chilltone, which is the label he was on, are really serious about the quality of the recording, and I think they did an amazing job bringing out the lush qualities of the music. Can't disagree with that. I must admit, it has been very well recorded. The album itself, Ballads, well, it's echoing Coltrane's 1963 album Ballads, for the same reason in a way. Coltrane, known for his sheets of sound and wild, extempore adventures, flying off in different directions, playing for 10, 15, 20 minutes non-stop, etc., etc. And he wanted to show, in a way, I think he had a softer side who can do that. Noah, the same as well, perhaps. He's better known for, as it says, going down more bracing paths in the past. But with this one showing he's got a much softer side. Aware of the rich tradition of the tenor sax, he says he's hoping to place his mark on the ballad album's canon, as it were, with this release, and quotes heroes such as John Coltrane, Coleman Hawkins, Sonny Rollins, through Michael Brecker and Seamus Blake, and also his teachers, including the great Dave Liebman, still going strong, of course, and George Garzoni. Wonderful stuff, and on the Chill label, nor Preminger, if you want something late at night. That's the one for you.
And he also seems to be doing the festival circuit, if you're lucky enough to pop into one of the European festivals.
But not Britain, yeah. I don't
summer.
think it's Britain.
No, not Britain, sadly. Well, that is just about it for this week. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, so some of you will no doubt still be polishing off your Easter egg collection. But before we go, there is just time for a track from the pianist and keyboardist Aaron Parkes and his band Little Big, with the snappily titled Little Big 3. No subtitle this time, on Blue Note Records, co-produced by Parkes and Blue Note boss Don Was. The band of guitarist Greg Toohey, bassist David Gignard and drummer Yonkup King taking over the drum duties from Tommy Crane, and of course Aaron Parkes at the keyboards. Here's Flyaways.
See you in a couple of weeks. Take
Bye
care.
for now.